This video is brought to you by True Tales of Buried Treasure, the largest collection of old treasure magazines in the West. On our website, you can search for individual treasure stories by region, or buy our original magazines themselves. To pay us a visit, please click on the link in the description. Enjoy. The tales of the Old West are rich with stories of buried treasures and lost mines, and the Bighorn Mountains of Wyoming serve as the backdrop for many of these intriguing legends. Among the most famous of these is the saga of the Lost Cabin Mine, one of the West's most elusive lost mines. The story of its discovery and subsequent abandonment bears a striking resemblance to another legendary lost mine, the Lost Adams Diggings in New Mexico, which was detailed in an article by Steve Wilson in the August 1968 issue of True Treasure. Over the years, countless stories have been told about the Lost Cabin Mine. As often happens, the line between fact and fiction has blurred, making it challenging to distinguish the two. However, enough documented facts exist to affirm that the Lost Cabin Mine did and still does exist. The many tales that have sprung up around this mysterious mine make for thrilling reading, so it's fitting to recount them here alongside the most credible version of the story that has been passed down. The most reliable account of the Lost Cabin Mine's discovery comes from H.James Moakler's book, History of Natrona County, Wyoming, published by R.R. Donnelly and Sons in 1923. Moakler cites an article by Charles K. Bucknam of Casper, published on June 24, 1897, as his source. According to Moakler, Bucknam had arrived in Wyoming and Montana during the early days of those territories and had taken part in the gold rush to Bannock and Virginia City. In his article, Bucknam tells of a prospector named Allen Hulbert, a veteran of the California Gold Rush of 1849, who was part of a trio that discovered the rich lode. Hulbert helped build the cabin that gave the mine its name, but his two partners were killed in an Indian attack, forcing him to flee. Despite his efforts, Hulbert was never able to locate the mine again. The story of Hulbert's discovery unfolds as follows. Hulbert joined the rush to California when gold was discovered there in 1849. After spending several years on the West Coast, he eventually made his way to Oregon and ended up in Walla Walla, Washington, penniless by the spring of 1863. Teaming up with two other men, he managed to gather enough supplies for a prospecting trip. They left Washington with 6 horses and a month's worth of provisions, following the Mullen Trail toward the Rockies. After a difficult journey, they reached the Yellowstone River and traveled downstream on rafts until they arrived at the Bighorn River, where they set up camp in a remote wilderness teeming with hostile Native Americans. Deciding to prospect the nearby mountains, they moved only under the cover of darkness to avoid detection. The deeper they ventured into the mountains, the more promising the gold signs became. Finally, they stumbled upon an incredibly rich vein and dug a shaft, striking pay dirt just 7 feet down. Despite the danger from Indian attacks, their greed for gold outweighed their fears. They decided to spend the winter mining, confident in their supply of ammunition and the abundance of game in the area. And so they remained, driven by the lure of untold riches buried deep within the earth. First, the men cut lumber and built a dam across the creek, setting up a sluice to extract gold. They worked tirelessly from dawn until dusk, even as winter's icy grip tightened on the land, earning about $100 daily. As the cold deepened and the creek froze solid, mining operations had to cease. The men sawed enough lumber to construct a sturdy cabin, creating a stronghold against potential attacks from hostile Native Americans. They also gathered ample hay for their horses and prepared to hunker down for the winter. Months later, as spring thawed the snow and frost, the prospectors eagerly returned to their sluice boxes and began reaping gold once again. For a time, all went well, but disaster struck suddenly in the form of a fierce Indian attack. Hulbert had left the creek to return to the cabin when gunshots shattered the stillness of the mountain air. Rushing back, he saw both of his partners fall, killed by the attackers. In the chaos, Hulbert managed to avoid detection, hiding until the Indians departed. He then hurried back to the cabin, quickly packed some food and a portion of his gold, and fled on foot as the Indians had taken the horses. On the trail where the 3 men had entered the mountains, Hulbert encountered a camp of Indians. Forced to change his route, he turned south and journeyed through a treacherous wilderness. Overcome with fear, Hulbert neglected to note any landmarks as he wandered for days, surviving on roots, berries, and small game caught in snares. After a grueling trek, he finally reached the prairies. From there, he aimed for the Oregon Trail, which he had traveled some 15 years earlier on his way to California. After enduring more hardships, he arrived at Reshaw Bridge, near what is now Casper, Wyoming, where he encountered his first white man since fleeing the mountains. At Reshaw Bridge, Hulbert met a group of men heading for Montana. He recounted the story of the fabulous gold vein he and his partners had discovered in the Big Horns, showing them the gold he had taken when he fled. Fired with ambition, about 150 people, including men, women, and children, decided to join Hulbert in searching for the lost mine. The group set out with around 50 wagons. For several months, Hulbert led the eager searchers through the mountains, but he could find no trace of the lost mine. Eventually, he admitted he was completely lost and had no idea where to search next. Frustrated, some of the men wanted to hang him, but they were stopped when another party member intervened at gunpoint. With tensions rising and the threat of Indian attacks looming, the group eventually disbanded, with most heading for Virginia City, Montana. Hulbert was last seen in that area in the autumn of 1864. Many stories about the lost cabin mine have been passed down through the years, some rooted in truth, others in fabrication. One tale tells of two miners who appeared at Fort Fetterman in 1865, claiming to have been part of a prospecting party that discovered gold in the Bighorns. They said they had built a cabin and begun mining before being attacked by a band of hostile Indians, who killed all but the two survivors. As proof, they showed golden nuggets they had hidden in powder cans. The men left the fort, heading east, and were never seen again. It's also known that several attempts were made to relocate the lost cabin mine, including one led by Thomas Page Comstock, who gave his name to the famous Comstock Lode in Virginia City, Nevada. Backed by a group of mining men, Comstock sought to rediscover the lost mine in the Big Horns, but like many before him, his efforts ended in failure. This event occurred in 1870. After a futile attempt to locate the lost cabin mine in the Big Horns, Thomas Page Comstock, well known for his discovery of the Comstock Lode, returned from his ill-fated expedition and tragically took his own life in Bozeman, Montana. Another tale tells of a very old man who was believed to know the location of the lost cabin mine. He arrived in Buffalo, Wyoming, with 3 young companions, determined to find the mine. Unfortunately, as the story goes, the old man suddenly died as he was boarding a wagon, taking the secret of the mine's location with him to the grave. An article in the Casper Tribune on August 17, 1893, reported that a prospector named Carter claimed to have rediscovered the lost cabin mine. According to Carter's account, he had set out from Montana with a group of men, one of whom was confident he could lead them to the legendary mine in Wyoming. After several days of fruitless searching, all but Carter and one other companion gave up. The two continued their quest and eventually stumbled upon a dense thicket. As Carter struggled through the thick underbrush, he discovered ancient logs, partially buried and weathered by time, that appeared to be remnants of a crude cabin. In one corner of the decaying structure, Carter found what had once been a door, and the collapsed roof of branches confirmed the cabin's age. Excited by their find, they began searching for gold. Not far from the cabin, they discovered a series of partially collapsed tunnels. The two men gathered as many rock samples as they could carry and headed to Casper. There, a man named Lilly pounded the ore in a mortar and found traces of gold. Intrigued by Carter's story, several Casper businessmen raised $100 to fund an expedition of 6 men to locate the lost mine. The group, led by Carter, returned to the Big Horns. After 3 days of travel, they reached the remains of the cabin. However, their hopes were dashed when they realized that what they had found was actually an old hunting blind constructed by Native Americans to conceal themselves while hunting game. Disappointed, the expedition returned to Casper empty-handed. In the summer of 1897, a man known as C.T. Rattlesnake Jones claimed to have stumbled upon the lost cabin associated with the lost cabin mine. Jones was notorious for carrying live rattlesnakes in his pockets, often pulling one out to pet during conversations with friends. Jones arrived in town one day with a sack of human bones, claiming they were the remains of the prospector who had discovered the lost cabin mine. He also asserted that spirits had guided him to the site. This account is just one of many swirling legends about the lost cabin mine. Father Jean-Pierre Desmet, the Jesuit missionary, is said to have known about the rich gold deposits of the lost cabin mine, supposedly learned from his Native American charges. It's on record that he once stated, "I know where gold exists in the Rocky Mountains in such abundance that, if made known, it would astonish the world." However, he never disclosed the mine's location, having promised his Native American friends to keep it a secret. Jim Bridger, the famed mountain man, and another trapper named La Pondre are also rumored to have known of this elusive deposit. Countless adventurers have searched for the lost cabin mine over the years, but more than a century after its supposed discovery, it remains as elusive as ever. While much fiction has grown around it, enough credible details suggest that it did exist and might still be found. Only time will reveal its true fate. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to read the original article or purchase the magazine from which it was taken, please check out our website, truetalesofburiedtreasure.com.